Hi, have you heard of Chromophone? That is a physical modeling synthesizer. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Not about that particular synth, but more about physical modeling synthesis. I had to look into that a while back just to understand what it is. And I think I do understand what it is, but there are still things that I find puzzling. If you're completely new to physical modeling synthesis, I think the easiest explanation is that it consists of two parts. One is an exciter and one is a resonator. And if we think of those two things in acoustic instruments, if we take a drum, the drumstick is the exciter and the drum itself is the resonator. Or if we take a violin, the bow would be the exciter and the violin itself is the resonator. So physical modeling synthesis uses software to replicate those two components. And by changing parameters, you change the characteristics of the resonator or the exciter. There are a few physical modeling instruments that comes with Ableton. One is, for example, tension. I think that is a physical modeling thing. Doing some plucked string things, and then we have collision, and this is replicating lots of different types of resonators like a beam, marimba, strings, membrane, plate, pipe, etc. So you get different characteristics of the sounds, and here we have the mallet, which is the thing that you're hitting this thing with. If we think back at other types of synthesis that have been around for perhaps longer than this type of synthesis, it feels like there's been an ambition to replicate acoustic instruments. So if you look at an analog synthesizer, a really old one, it might have presets like oboe and trumpet and strings or something like that. And again, when FM synthesis came about, if you look at the old DX7 and things, it's working really hard to replicate those acoustic properties. But I would say it does it arguably bad. It can never be more than second best. But it feels like as the capability of developing these technologies have become better, it becomes closer to the acoustic equivalent. So there are some quite convincing physical modeling synthesis engines that sound very much like, a saxophone or a piano or whatever it is that you're replicating. But I also feel like it can only be second best. And if you want a Steinway piano, it's probably best to play a Steinway piano. And I think these instruments, the analog synths, the FM synths, and also potentially the physical modeling synths, will they become most interesting when you actually use them in their own right, rather than trying to mimic something else? I feel that's both when old analog synths have been really celebrated, is when you have let them loose and just be their own thing, and also with FM synthesis, which I am very fond of. And I'm interested in physical modeling now to look at how that can be used in its own right to create really unique sound that the acoustic equivalents couldn't do. So there's actually really good, especially good reason to using them. A few weeks ago, I downloaded the demo of Chromophone 3, which seems to be quite a highly regarded physical modeling VST. And indeed, it sounds really interesting in many ways, and I think it can be used as a very expressive instrument when modulating all the different parameters. But it's also a bit puzzling. One thing that I have found somewhat tricky to understand when it comes to physical modeling is the envelopes doesn't seem to work quite in the same way as I am used to. And especially for the resonator, it's more looking just as the decay stage rather than that there is an attack, decay, and release. And also all these engines that I have been playing with, including the ones that comes with Ableton, they seem to start, as in like if you dig as deep as you can, it still starts quite far away from just creating some sort of waveform, because both FM synthesis and, you know, just subtractive analog synthesizers and things like that, it feels like you start with a very raw building block, which is a waveform. I find this method is a little bit opaque, and a lot of the work has already been done and packaged in a particular way, and some parameters have been exposed to you as a user to tweak whatever is happening underneath, rather than it doesn't feel quite as raw. I was playing around with Chromophone and I just found it difficult to make really pronounced and defined sounds. What I was after was I was trying to make some percussion sounds basically, and I just couldn't get the punch and things that I was after. And I've been thinking about this, like, yeah, I understand the concept of the exciter and the resonator, but how can I make that myself? How can I do physical modeling on my modular without buying a module that does all the things in an opaque way underneath? Can I just patch it in some way? Because I can patch FM, I can patch subtractively, I can, you know, you can do those things. I was thinking a bit more about it, and how can you replicate an exciter and a resonator in Ableton? And you can. I think this method would be called karplus strong synthesis, but it is a very rudimentary form of physical modeling. So how can we do this? Let's build our own little synth here. I'm going to start off taking the operator. It sounds like this. An FM synthesizer, you may say, but let's turn this into our exciter element. The first thing we're going to do is we don't want this to be velocity sensitive at all, so we're just going to, and not affect the keys in any way. We set the filter to be fully open, and then we are going to change the waveform to noise, and then we're just going to turn this into a click. Turn the volume up a bit. Doesn't matter which key I'm pressing, it will still generate the same tone. It's basically just white noise with a very short envelope making just this click sound. So if this is our exciter, we now need something that this can make resonate. There are a few things that can do this, but it's basically some form of delay with a feedback, and that actually includes a reverb as well, because a reverb is actually a form of a delay, much tighter. But I think a good one to use for this purpose is the echo. The reason for that is because the feedback can be turned up much higher compared to the just delay pedal. So now it's just echoing that out with the default setting, and we need to turn up the feedback to create a tone. So if I turn the feedback up, we should be careful not to turn it much over 100, because then it will just go on forever, basically sending the echo back into itself. But that doesn't sound like a tone, it's just that click sound. And to be able to make, as we're making this delay shorter, the delay time eventually will get to that tone element. And to be able to make it really short, we should turn sync off and just have it in milliseconds instead. So you will hear now. All of a sudden we got a tone there. And depending on how tight we make this, we get a different pitch. Now, by default, this is acting like many hardware delays. You can hear the pitch is slowly shifting, and we want to turn that off. So if we go into character and turn repitch off, So in theory, now we should be able to start making a melody. In a very rudimentary sense, this is already a little sort of karplus strong synth. And the more that you turn up the feedback, the longer the decay time will be. But as mentioned, you have to be careful, because if you go above about 104%, then it will just get louder and louder. We can already, in its most basic form, just make a melody now if we want. You can either, let's just draw in, it doesn't matter which notes you draw here, because it's always going to be C3. So we just make something with some. You have two options now. This will be somewhat atonal, because changing that around doesn't correspond to any particular note. Actually, just to see what notes we get when we change this, we can take utilities and tuner. So it's currently somewhere far off an A. And if we then go into here, we can come on, and click here, and then we want to change the echo delay time. We should be able to get some different note. But as you can see, there's no, it doesn't follow the sort of a Western scale. The other thing you can do, because I still think that this atonal method is quite interesting, but to be able to, actually we delete the automation, and then we go in and take the trusty expression control, and then we change the drop down to key track. So if I now drop a few different notes in here, you can see how the key tracking, this is corresponding to the different notes playing, and then we can map that to this. Oh, and one thing to remember, because we actually want to the higher the note we play, the lower value we want to have. So we should invert this. We probably want to pitch these up a bit. But again, this is not going to track perfectly across the keyboard. There's a way around this too. So let's ditch that. We can still have the tuner left. We can cheat, but let's turn this into a clean C, a C note, so we can actually got a good starting point. And if we change this to about 30, we are a little bit off C there, as you can see, but then we can take the where is it? Audio effects. It lives in pitch and modulation, the shifter, and then we can fine tune that a bit. Oh, obviously it needs to sit before the tuner. So there we got a C as a starting point. Now, because this moves in semitones, we can now make a melody if we modulate this here. So let's go in here, shifter, pitch, coarse shift. So this should now correspond to real notes. can do. I'm just making something up now. So as you can see, that is now corresponding to real notes. This doesn't currently have a filter. You can change the filter of the exciter, but the sound does not have a filter. Actually, should we just pitch, make these a bit higher? To get a little bit more control over your sound, we can now take an auto filter and we place that here. And we go in and take in the MIDI effects, the shaper, which is this clever little envelope, and we map that to the cutoff. We're starting to get our own little synth going here. Crank the volume up at the different stages because it tends to get quite quiet otherwise. Sorry about that. Let me put a limiter here at the end just to make sure that we don't fry our ears. So we got our little physical modeling synth here now. And it feels quite tedious to have to go in here and draw in the notes using this stuff. So I've made a little Max for Live device. So let's unmap that, delete the automation. This Max for Live device looks incredibly untidy. And I am just trying to remember what it's called. It is called FS Manipulator. And the thing that does, because the shifter can only deal with 4 octaves. You can pitch something down 4 octaves, or you can pitch it up down 2 octaves and up 2 octaves. So I've made a little Max for Live device that looks very ugly, that works from C2 up to C, what will it be? So I think it's C2. We could just go down to here, C2 to C. We set that right. So that's the lowest it can go. Let me see now how that looks. Or maybe it's even C1, but that would just be too dark anyway. So with this little Max for Live device, if we just skip this melody thing now, I can actually play this across 4 octaves. A little nice monophonic synth. So we have made ourselves a unique little synth in Ableton. I'm going to group this and let's just minimize some of these. And a few things that I'm going to do, let me see, and then we want to map this to a few parameters. So we got, let's open the operator and the shifters. So the echo, here we are. We want to be able to shift, we won't be able to do the feedback. Which will basically correspond to the decay. So we do that to decay. And that filter, let's do that to, so we can offset that filter effect. So we call that filter. But we maybe want to restrict that so we can actually not go as low as that, because then it's all quiet. And then we can do the resonance, which needs to be, let's turn that mapping off, and then we want to have the resonance, which can be the resonance of the filter. Where does the filter live? Here, filter. So we do the filter resonance. And that one, the rate will be the filter decay. And then if you want to retune this, we can actually do that through the echo here. So if we do this and call it tuning. Tune. $330. And let's call that TFP the TFP karplus synth. I think karplus is spelled like that. Let's make these some nice colors here. Whoops. Easier to spot what we can change. Okay, there you have it. You have a nice monosynth. If you feel like you can support this channel, then I think you should sign up to my Patreon, and you'll be able to download this. You can use it for yourself, so you don't have to build one, and you will get that Max for Live device that sort of just helps you map the shifter plugin. Also, on Friday, I will release my next part for my drum synth thing. It will be the glitch percussion. It will be probably 3 different glitches to add to your drum synthesis. I've done the kick, the hi-hat, the snare so far. So the next one is the glitch, which will actually be 3 individual ones. And I've also been thinking about updating my clap synthesis engine. So all going well, that will come out next week. So thank you everyone who's supporting this channel. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you in the next one.